So I get messages sometimes from people who want to buy a new camera because the camera that they have is bad in low light. And sometimes that's true. If they have an older camera, for example, it could be that it's just not good at filming in low light conditions. But a lot of times it's not true. Their camera is not as bad in low light as they think it is. They're just, brainwashed by what they see and hear here on YouTube. And so in this video, I want to do the opposite. Instead of washing your brain, I want to make it dirty again. That doesn't make sense at all, but let's do it anyway because I want to make sure that you can make a well-informed decision if you're planning to buy a new low-light camera. Here we go. Okay, so first of all, obviously some cameras are just objectively better in low light than others because they're designed for it, they're built for it. That's also why you always see the same cameras pop up when people talk about low light filming, especially here on YouTube. My A7S III, for example. The design and technology of the sensor, how the software processes the image, all of that makes that the A7S III is one of the best low-light cameras out there. But that doesn't mean that if you're looking for a camera that's good in low light, that the A7S III is the best option for you. And also, it happens all the time that different people have completely different opinions about the low-light capabilities of a specific camera model. Why? Well, a lot of times I see people comparing the image of two different cameras, not realizing that one of those cameras has built-in noise reduction. And so they're basically comparing apples to oranges, right? And we can again take my A7S III as an example. The A7S III has built-in noise reduction that you cannot turn off. So yeah, the A7S III will allow you to shoot at ISO 12800, which I often do, and it's amazing, don't get me wrong. But what you get is a processed image. It doesn't have all the detail and sharpness that it would have had without the noise reduction. And some people just don't want that. They want a clean, unprocessed image so they have all control in the editing process. So they can decide how much noise reduction they want to apply. So always keep that in mind if you're comparing the image of two different cameras. And also, by the way, just because it has built-in noise reduction doesn't mean that the image of the A7S III at 12,800 is squeaky clean. No, there's noise. But I have to say, it's good noise and not bad noise. What? Wait, so there's good noise and bad noise? Well, yeah, so there's basically two different types of noise. Luminance noise and chroma noise, or colored noise, or lumen noise and chroma noise. And luminance noise looks more like film grain, it's colorless, whereas chroma noise most of the time just looks ugly. Usually in the shadow areas, you get these green magenta artifacts, basically ruining the detail and the overall image. And here's the thing. When you boost your ISO, you'll always get more noise. It doesn't matter if your camera is good or bad in low light, there's always going to be more noise. But a camera that's good in low light won't have the chroma noise, or at least as little as possible. It will just have more luminance noise the more you boost your ISO, which looks more like film grain. Now, there's also differences in luminance noise quality, but overall we can say that chroma noise bad, luminance noise good. However, that being said, what you always have to remember is that a big part of the what's a good low-light camera discussion is subjective. So many times I see in the comments people who say that an image looks too noisy, but then other people reply that it looks great. And that's totally fine, of course, but please decide for yourself what you find acceptable when it comes to noise and image quality and sharpness. Just because some YouTuber or just because I like something doesn't mean that you have to like it. And vice versa, of course. And I love giving you information, but in the end, you have to decide what's acceptable. And that's super important. And you know what else is super important? Music. And I get my music from Audiio, the sponsor of this video. And it doesn't matter if you're looking for music for a commercial that you made, or a travel video, or just some basic background music, with Audiio you'll always find the perfect song. And it's all real music from real artists, and you can use everything, including the sound effects, for personal and client work. If you get a pro subscription, which is 70% off if you use my link and code in the description. Or, if you want, you can also go for the lifetime subscription, which is $199, and that's a one-time payment. So, you see, there's something for everyone. Just keep in mind that the lifetime subscription doesn't include all the cool AI features. But if you don't need those, go for it. But not everything is subjective, of course, when it comes to low light. Exposure, for example. Especially when shooting in low light, it's even more important. Because every camera, every sensor, every color profile and video format behaves differently in low light and needs to be exposed differently in low light. So before you say that your camera is bad in low light, make sure that you know how your camera works. Learn the basics. Make sure that you know how to expose properly in low light. Also because you don't have a lot of wiggle room to fix it in post when shooting in low light. And you know, a few months ago when I was testing the Pixis 6K, the low light results were okay in the beginning. But then the more I used that camera and the more I learned about it, how to expose the footage for example, well, the better the low light results became. And in my opinion, that camera is much better in low light than most people think. But you have to know how to use it first. But I was used to shooting with my A7S III in low light, and you can't compare the A7S III to the Pixis 6K. They're two totally different beasts. Simple. And now let's talk a bit about editing and color grading, because that's where you can also make a lot of mistakes when it comes to low light and bad looking low light footage. Raising shadows, for example. Raising shadows will almost always reveal some of that ugly noise. That's just how it is. But that doesn't always mean that a camera is bad in low light. Sure, some cameras allow you to lift the shadows more than others without revealing that ugly noise. But that doesn't mean that those others are bad in low light. You just have to get the exposure spot on and it will look amazing. But also the opposite is true. You can make bad noise disappear. Not really, but it looks like it disappears if you lower the exposure. So maybe you used a high ISO setting, right? But you also slightly overexposed your image too much and it looks noisier than it should have. Well, just lower the exposure in post and it could make a huge difference. And there's also absolutely nothing wrong with using noise reduction in DaVinci Resolve or Premiere Pro or Final Cut Pro. And just because your footage needs it, doesn't mean that your camera is bad in low light. Especially when you're comparing everything to the A7S III or the FX3, for example, because those cameras have built-in noise reduction, remember? But then when we take let's take the Pixis 6K again, for example. It shoots B-RAW and there's no built-in noise reduction. So it will always look noisier than a camera with built-in noise reduction. Not saying that the Pixis 6K is as good in low light as the A7S III, not at all, but you know what I mean, right? But some cameras require you to apply noise reduction in post, and just some very mild noise reduction often makes a huge difference. And something that a lot of beginners also don't realize is that ISO is just weird and complicated. It really is. Just go check out some videos that explain the technical details of ISO and how sensors work. I'm telling you, it's crazy and complicated. Even I don't understand everything. Also, on top of that, how ISO works is different for every camera. Some cameras, for example, have a dual ISO or dual native ISO system or dual gain system. Go check out my video on the Pixis 6K and its low light capabilities. That's where I try to explain it. But basically some cameras have a system where, for example, ISO 1250 looks cleaner than ISO 1000. On my A7S III, for example, 12,800 looks cleaner than 6,400. Weird, right? But it's just because of that dual blah blah system. And some cameras have it, some cameras don't. And then also, a lot of times the recommended base ISO at which you should shoot is different for every camera. Sometimes it's 640, sometimes it's 400, sometimes it's 800. So yeah, ISO is weird and complicated. Do some research before you buy a camera. You really have to study some of this stuff if you want to fully understand it. But then, on the other hand, I also get the impression sometimes that low light is a buzzword that manufacturers like to use to sell cameras. It's a topic that videographers and photographers love to talk about, so manufacturers use it to sell cameras. Just put low light on it and it will sell. So all I want to say is, always do your own research. And here's something that can make a camera that's pretty good in low light look really bad in low light instantly. Pixel peeping. I often find myself looking at footage, finding it a bit too noisy for my taste. But then I look at the upper left, that thing. I look there and I see that it's at 400 or 500%. So I'm looking at footage zoomed in to 500%, which is like sitting with your nose on your TV. You know what I mean? So I always try to judge the quality of the footage at 200% maximum, or full screen, but then not with my nose against the screen. Because of course you're gonna find something if you zoom in to 500%. And you know what? For example, and I'm gonna exaggerate now, so hold your horses in the comments. I'm exaggerating now. Look at this. This is sample footage from the Alexa 35, ARRI RAW, and that's I don't even know how much that camera costs. But if you zoom in here, and this is from their website, if you zoom in on the shadow side of her face to 500% or 600, you can also see some of that ugly color noise, if you're really looking for it. So pixel peepers will always find something bad. They can make the greatest camera look bad, but it's all here in their head. I hope you understand what I'm trying to say here. And what also affects how noise is perceived is resolution, by the way. If your camera shoots 6K, for example, like my cinema camera 6K, well, if you shoot at full resolution and the image has a fair amount of noise, it won't look as bad when your final result will be 4K. So when you downsize that 6K, but then also the other way around. 1080 footage that looks okay might look super noisy when you blow it up to 4K. So just something to keep in mind. This is something that I also mentioned in my low light tips video, but it's super important. Low light is not the same as no light. Just because some cameras can shoot in conditions where there's almost no light, ISO 12800, remember? Well, that doesn't mean that a camera that shoots great quality video at ISO 1600 or 3200 is not a low light camera anymore. Of course not. If your camera can shoot good quality video in low light at ISO 1600 or 3200, well, with the right lenses, it can handle almost any low light situation. No problem. So I was also curious to know what real cinematographers think about this whole low light discussion and what they think is a good low light camera. So I went spying in the comment section of real cinema camera reviews. And I mean real cinema cameras, $50,000, $100,000, the expensive ones. And it's funny because, for example, you see people talk about how, for example, the image of a camera, $50,000 camera, in a low light context, how it looks good at ISO 1600, right? But then 3200 is unusable. But then their conclusion is that that camera performs really well in low light. So there's a completely different mindset. You also never see anyone asking for a camera that can push the ISO to 6400 or 12800. Never. But then if you see the comment sections under the latest mirrorless camera, well, then you'll probably see ISO 3200, unusable. That camera is horrible in low light. Completely different mindset. But it's kind of understandable because when you're going to use a $50,000 camera, you're probably also going to use a crew to light everything. So, you know, they don't need those super high ISOs. For them, other things are important. But then if you're a videographer or a content creator and you go out at night or you're traveling, well, in that case, a camera that can push the ISO to 12,800 is super useful because you don't have a lighting crew, obviously. And then finally, well, I can't help but get the feeling that there's a lot of fanboyism in the comment sections under camera reviews. And people can't think for themselves anymore. They just repeat what other people think about the camera without ever having used that camera or seen actual video files. All they saw is just some compressed YouTube video. And so, look, all I actually want to say with this video, this long video I think, all I want to say is that when it comes to low light, it's part skill, part how good your camera is, and part subjective. So don't rely too much on what other people say. Think for yourself, learn how your camera works, how photography, how videography works, how light works, and do your own research. Thank you so much for watching and see you in the next one.